Hey guys, in this video we're going to be looking at chapter 13 of the Ecce textbook titled Disaster. And in this story, you're going to learn about the family's journey as they start off to Rome. Now the grammar for this chapter is coming back to verbs, and we're going to be looking at a new tense. So everything we've done in the first 12 chapters has been what's called the present tense. In this chapter, we're going to be looking to a past tense, specifically called the imperfect. So of course we're going to start with the chapter 13 vocabulary. So the first word we want to look at is iter, which means journey in Latin. And in English, this leads to the derivative of itinerary. And again, it means the same thing. If you're going on a journey, an itinerary is usually the outline of that journey you're about to take. We call it an itinerary. It comes from this word of iter that also means journey. So you can see the meaning is retained in the From rusticus, which means peasant, we get the word rustic in English. And again, it's talking about people, not necessarily poor people, but peasants as in the idea of working in the country or the countryside. That's what rustic means in English. Septimus means seventh in Latin. And an easy way to remember this is think of the month September. It's got the same root of 7 in it. And the reason for this is because September was the 7th month of the year in the Roman calendar. So if you can remember September, you'll remember that Septimus means 7. Next we have quiescebant, and this word means they were resting. And this is our imperfect tense that we're going to be learning in this chapter. But the root of this word comes to us in English as quiet. And if you think about it, if you're being quiet, you're probably resting. So it's got the same idea. Pace means foot in Latin, and it gives us in English a few derivatives such as pedal, pedestrian, bipedal, quadruped, impediment, and expedition. These all have to do with the word for foot. And if you look, you can see if you're pedaling, think of even pedaling a bike, you're using your foot. And if a pedestrian is what we call someone who's walking, right? It all has to do with walking on your feet. And the same goes for bipedal and quadruped. A bipedal animal like humans is one that stands on 2 feet, just like a quadruped would be one that stands on 4 feet. So the root for foot is in all 6 of these English derivatives. Vehicula means vehicles in Latin. And in English, we get the derivatives of vehicle and vehicular. And they're coming directly from this word, and they have the exact same meaning. Civis means citizen in Latin, and in English we get the derivatives of civic, civil, civilian, civilization, and civilize. They all have to do with being a citizen. So again, think of a civilian, for instance. It's the citizen of a country. And if you think of your civic duty, such as voting, that means you're doing your duty as a citizen. It's holding on to that same meaning in English. Pars means part in Latin. And in English, we get the derivatives particle, partial, depart, participate, and apart. They're all coming from that same meaning of part of something. Ferociter means fiercely. It's an adverb in Latin, and in English, it has the same root as our word ferocious. And you can tell it means basically the same thing. Fiercely, ferociously, it's the same root. The next word is vito vitare, which means to avoid in Latin. And in English, we get the derivative of inevitable. And let's think of the meaning of that word. If something is inevitable, it means it's unavoidable. So you can tell it has that same meaning as vitare, to avoid. So the grammar for this chapter, the first part, is third declension I stem nouns. And this is an idea that we're just touching the surface of in this chapter, but we'll come back to later on in the book. But for now, you want to think about declensions, specifically the third declension, and the noun endings that go with it. So just a quick recap. This is the chart we've seen so far this year for noun endings in the first, second, and third declension. And in this chapter, we're specifically looking at the third declension, so you don't have to worry about the other 2 for now. But look at these third declension endings. And if we focus in on them, they should look familiar to you by now. But let's take a vocab word from this chapter, pars partus. Now if we look at it, we're specifically looking at the genitive plural when we're talking about I stems. So if we were to apply the genitive plural ending, the word we would come up with is partum. And you can see it's taking that ending, which is third declension genitive plural, and we're adding it on. We've taken the genitive singular of partus, and we've dropped that is ending to get our base. Now we add the genitive plural ending, we would get partum. The problem with this, though, is that the word in the genitive plural is not partum. It actually has a slightly different ending. And the ending it has is partium. Now, if we look at it, you'll notice it's got an I in there. An extra I has slid in. So compare it over to our genitive plural. That ending is now ium. This is what we're talking about when we say third declension I stem nouns. It means in the genitive plural, instead of a there's an I. So just a quick review. Some third declension nouns, such as kiwis and pars in this chapter, are going to end in ium instead of in the genitive plural. These are what we call I stem nouns. And again, it's because of that extra I that's added in. It's literally added on to the base or the stem of the noun. These I stem nouns will be identified in your vocabulary lists. And what's going to happen is in the list, it will give you the genitive plural, and you'll notice the ium in that genitive plural. That's the book's way of telling you this is an I stem noun. So again, the ones we're going to see in this chapter are kiwis, which means a citizen, and you'll see it listed out like this. It'll say genitive plural, kiwium. The same goes for pars. It will say pars partus, then the genitive plural, partium. And again, that genitive plural that they're listing in your book, that's what's telling you this is an I stem noun. You're looking at that ium ending. So just a quick hint that I think will help you out. You're going to learn more about third declension I stems as you move through Ecce Romani, but there's a couple tricks you can learn now that will help you identify them. So the first trick is that most masculine and feminine third declension nouns that end in either is or a long es are going to be I stem, but they're only I stem if their nominative singular has the same number of syllables as the genitive singular. We call this parasyllabic. So for instance, let's look at kiwis. The first thing you'll notice is that it ends in an is, so that nominative singular is an is. That's our first hint that this might be I stem. And on top of it, you want to count out the syllables. The nominative singular is kiwis, 2 syllables. The genitive singular is also kiwis, which is 2 syllables. That's what we mean by parasyllabic. They have the same number of syllables. That's an easy way to tell without the book listing the genitive plural for you. This is an easy way to tell that this word kiwis is an I stem. The second thing that might help you is that masculine and feminine nouns that end in either s or x, and remember we're talking about third declension nouns here, when they end in either s or x in the nominative singular and also have a base that ends in 2 consonants, these will be I stem too. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take our other I stem from this chapter, pars partus. And if you'll notice, in the singular nominative, it's ending in an s. So this is our first hint that it might be an I stem. And if we look at the base, and remember, to get the base, we go to the genitive singular and drop the is. The base here would be part, and you'll notice that it's ending in 2 consonants, the rt that I've highlighted here. That's your hint that this will be a third declension I stem noun. So again, you don't even need the genitive plural listed out. You can tell by this simple trick. This brings us to the imperfect tense, and you'll notice that I've written it here as part 1, just like your book has. And the reason for that is this is just an introduction to the imperfect tense. In the next chapter, you're going to be learning all the endings and learning more about it. For right now, we just want to get introduced to it and be able to recognize when a verb is in the imperfect. We also want to compare that to what we know about the present tense. And again, it's just about understanding how this works. What you'll notice is that up until now, we've been doing present tense verbs. Now we're going to be going into the past tense, and specifically the imperfect, which is a past tense. So just a recap of the present tense. All the verbs we've seen so far have been present tense. And remember, we said that these present tense verbs are used to describe actions that are taking place at the time of the story, meaning they're happening right now. So let's look at our verb endings. Remember, this is our chart of the 4 conjugations that we've seen, and all of their endings. Hopefully by now this looks familiar, and you could conjugate verbs like this. The question though is, what happens if we want to talk about the past? Now, to start, you want to think. The word tense comes from Latin, tempus, which means time. So when we say the tense of a verb, we're talking about what time is this action taking place. That's what we mean by the tense. And again, for this chapter, we're going to be learning how you take verbs that are in the present and put them in the past. So let's take a look at the imperfect tense. If we're thinking of an arrow of time, for instance, you might add in the present and the past tense. And for the present tense, we would say things like, I walk. Now, if we put that into the past in English, you would say, I walked. By adding that ed, you're making it a past tense verb, and you're telling your listener or your audience that the action isn't happening right now, it happened before in the past. And the present tense, we're talking about something happening right now, so it's almost like a set action. You can pick out a particular time when it's happening because it's happening right now. The same goes for the past. In general, when you're talking about something happening in the past, you're talking about one specific time. So you might say, I walked to school at 8 a.m. You're talking about a very specific time in the past. The imperfect tense, though, is used to describe actions that happened in the past but did not have one definitive start and end time. So in other words, they were continuous, ongoing, or repeated actions. So for instance, let's take this example. I was walking to school today. The part you want to look at is was walking. That's your verb. This is talking about a continuous or an ongoing action. When you say I was walking, you're not talking about a particular set time. You're saying that, you're talking about the entire time it took you to walk from your home to school. It's an ongoing action. Let's try another. I was going to camp every summer. Again, we have the verb was going. This is a repeated action. Once you say I was going every summer, you're talking about it happening year after year after year. It's a repeated action. It's not one set time in the past. It's ongoing and repeated. And the last example we want to look at is he kept yelling at his sister. Now the kept yelling here is our verb. And again, it's continuous, ongoing, or repeated. Because it wasn't just one particular time that he was yelling at his sister. It was an ongoing thing. He did it over and over again. This is what we're talking about when we use the imperfect tense. So if we go back to our line here, the imperfect tense is part of the past, so it goes under that category of a past tense verb. But unlike the past, where it might have happened at one particular time, the imperfect is more fluid. It's talking about a range of time, not one set period of time. This is the key to understanding the imperfect. It's talking about something that was ongoing or repeated. So in English, we translate the imperfect by using the words was, kept, or used to, and you might have noticed that in our examples. So what difference do you notice between the following Latin verbs in the present and the imperfect tenses? So first, we'll start with laudo, which means I praise, and laudabam, which means I was praising. And we can do that with a few more examples. Verberat, verberabat, paramus, parabamus. What do you notice here that's different? Well, one thing you should notice is that they have slightly changed endings. So in the present, we would say laudo, and in the imperfect, we would say laudabam. Now in the second example, we have verberat, and then we have verberabat. So you'll notice that something has happened here. In particular, we're talking about these two letters in the imperfect, the BA. This is what's known as an infix. And what's happening here is this is the marker to tell you that you're looking at an imperfect verb. The BA goes in front of our endings, and it's telling you this is happening in the past, this is the imperfect tense. So you always want to be on the lookout for a BA that's been put inside your. So let's take a look at an example. Cornelia in agris ambulabad. Now you'll notice in this, we see that BA infix. Instead of ambulat, it's ambulabat. That BA has been snuck in there. So the way we translate this is Cornelia was walking in the fields. Instead of saying she is walking, it's the imperfect. So she was walking in the fields. There's one more quick note we need to take on the imperfect, and it has to do with the two verbs sum esse, which means to be, and possum posse, which means to be able. Now when we use these two verbs in the imperfect tense, they have a different tense sign, so you're not going to see the BA. And the reason that they have a different sign is because they're irregular verbs, meaning they don't follow our usual patterns. So let's take a look at a few examples. On the left, with esse, you can see erat, and then with posse, poterat. The tense sign here that's telling you this is imperfect is the ERA, and you can see it on both verbs. Whenever you see ERA, it's the sign that the imperfect tense is being used. So if you think back to esse, usually we would say sum, which means I am, or est, which means he or she is. So let's think of est for this example. The est, est, which is present tense, in the imperfect has been changed to erat. So you can see the beginning of the word has changed. That's the marker to tell you this is an imperfect verb. You want to keep track of this because, like I said, they're irregular, so it's not necessarily going to follow the patterns we learn for regular verbs. So just keep track of it, memorize it, and it will help you recognize this moving forward. So the last bit of grammar we want to talk about for this chapter is adverbs. And these are something that are important in Latin. We haven't really studied them too much, but this will be a good introduction for you. So the thing you want to know about adverbs is that they're one more way that we can expand our sentences in Latin. So adverbs can modify verbs, as in I walk slowly. So if you think of that example, the word slowly there is modifying the verb walk. You're describing how you walk. I walk slowly. Adverbs can also modify adjectives. So think of the example, I am very smart. The word very is an adverb that's modifying smart, the adjective. You're saying, how smart are you? I'm very smart. And the last thing is adverbs can modify other adverbs. So let's think of the sentence, I walk very slowly. The word very there is modifying slowly, which is an adverb. So again, you're saying, how slowly am I walking? I'm walking very slowly. This is how adverbs work. So far, we've seen a few Latin adverbs in our stories, quite a variety actually. So we've seen words like saepe, which means often, semper, which means always, mox, which means soon, and non jam, which means no longer. All four of these are adverbs, so you want to pay attention to the vocabulary list. The book will mark it as ADV, which stands for adverb. Sometimes in Latin, adverbs are formed by using the ending e, as in a long e, or iter, and we put them on adjectives to make adverbs. So for instance, if you had the adjective strenuous, which we've seen before, it means active. What we do is drop the us ending and add a long e. Now you have strenue, which means strenuously. And again, you want to notice that in English, the adverb always ends in ly. That's the way we do it in English. Another example would be celer, which means quick. So to that, we would add the ending iter, and you get celeriter, which means quickly. You've made an adverb out of an adjective. This is the most often that we've seen so far. Adverbs are going to be showing up like this. So adverbs most often indicate the time, place, or manner of the action of the verb. So for instance, if we had Marcus is often sleeping, or Cornelia, what are you doing here? Or Sextus walks stealthily. There's adverbs in each one of these sentences. The first, the word often is describing the timing of the action. So you're saying, when is Marcus sleeping? He's sleeping often. In the second sentence, it's showing place. So you're saying, Cornelia, what are you doing here? The word here is modifying doing. You're saying the place that she is doing. And the last one is showing manner. So the word stealthily is describing walks. You're saying, how is he walking? Or in what manner is he walking? And the answer is stealthily. This is how adverbs work. Pay attention to them moving forward. Like I said, they're not something you need to spend all of your time on in this chapter, but they'll become more advanced moving forward in the book, so you want to make sure you understand how they work now.